The terrifying thing about powerful men is not when they forget other people, but when they begin forgetting themselves. The boardroom on the 42nd floor of Whitmore Global smelled like dark coffee, leather, and expensive silence. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glowed beneath a cold November rain, yellow taxi lights streaking across wet streets nearly 500 feet below. Inside, 12 investors sat around a polished black conference table worth more than most American families made in a year. No one spoke above a whisper when Adrian Whitmore entered the room. At 43, Adrian carried the kind of presence that made conversations stop without effort. His charcoal Brioni suit fit perfectly across broad shoulders that had appeared on the covers of Forbes and Fortune more times than anyone could count. Silver threaded faintly through his dark hair at the temples. His steel blue eyes looked sharp enough to cut through excuses before they were spoken. Men twice his age feared disappointing him. Younger executives copied the way he walked, the way he adjusted his cufflinks, even the way he paused before answering difficult questions. Adrian Whitmore was not just a CEO. He was the CEO people imagined when they heard the word billionaire. Calm, precise, untouchable. But that morning, something was wrong. Very wrong. He stopped halfway to his chair. His fingers tightened around the leather folder in his hand. The room waited. One investor cleared his throat softly. Another glanced down at quarterly projections projected onto the massive screen behind Adrian. Rain tapped quietly against the glass. Adrian stared at the empty chair at the head of the table like he had never seen it before, like he had forgotten why he was there. His assistant Rachel noticed first. Her polite smile faded almost instantly. "Mr. Whitmore?" she asked carefully. Adrian blinked once, then twice. His jaw tightened. "Of course," he murmured quietly, though the words sounded delayed somehow. He sat down slowly, opening the folder in front of him. Except the folder was upside down. No one moved. Wall Street investors were experts at pretending not to notice weakness. But fear had a smell. And suddenly, it filled the room. Adrian glanced toward the presentation screen. The numbers blurred together. He knew these men. He knew this company. He knew this room. So why couldn't he remember the name of the man sitting directly across from him? The investor smiled nervously. "We're excited about the Zurich acquisition, Adrian." Zurich. The word hit him like cold water. Acquisition. Switzerland. Numbers. Contracts. His mind scrambled desperately for footing. Nothing came. A horrible silence stretched across the table. Adrian's pulse began hammering inside his ears. Not now. Dear God, not now. He reached for the glass of water beside him, but his hand stopped halfway. He couldn't remember if he had already taken medication that morning, or if he had forgotten again. "Mr. Whitmore?" Rachel repeated softly, panic barely hidden beneath professionalism now. Adrian opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time in nearly 20 years, Adrian Whitmore looked afraid. Then came the quiet sound of heels crossing marble. Soft, unhurried, controlled. No one noticed her at first, because people like Evelyn Carter were trained not to be noticed. She wore the standard black and white uniform from the executive restaurant downstairs. Simple black skirt, white blouse, dark blonde hair tied neatly behind her head. No jewelry except a thin silver watch on her wrist. She carried a polished tray with coffee service meant for the meeting break scheduled 20 minutes later. Yet somehow, she walked into the silence like she belonged inside it. Evelyn set a fresh glass of water beside Adrian without looking startled by the tension choking the room. "Your next appointment is waiting downstairs, Mr. Whitmore," she said gently. Her voice was calm enough to lower the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. "You asked me to remind you personally." Adrian looked up at her. For one terrifying second, his eyes seemed completely lost. Then something shifted. Recognition. Relief. A rope thrown to a drowning man. "Right?" Adrian said quietly, recovering just enough composure to stand. "Of course. We'll continue this discussion after lunch." Nobody questioned him. Nobody dared. Investors immediately began pretending the interruption was normal. Chairs slid back politely. Phones appeared. Forced smiles returned. The illusion of control stitched itself back together in seconds. But Rachel noticed the truth in Adrian's face as he walked out. So did Evelyn. He wasn't irritated. He wasn't distracted. He was frightened. Adrian moved quickly down the private hallway outside the boardroom until the heavy doors shut behind them. Then he stopped walking entirely. His shoulders dropped slightly, exhaustion replacing authority so suddenly it almost hurt to witness. Evelyn remained quiet beside him. She never pushed, never stared, never made him feel smaller than he already did in moments like these. Adrian pressed trembling fingers against his temple. "What day is it?" he whispered. The question barely sounded human. Evelyn answered immediately. "Tuesday, November 17th. Adrian closed his eyes. Rain hammered harder against the skyscraper windows now. Somewhere below them, Manhattan kept moving without mercy. "I forgot his name," Adrian admitted quietly. "I looked directly at him and forgot his name." Evelyn's expression softened, though her posture stayed composed. "You're exhausted," she said gently. "That's all." But both of them knew it was a lie. Adrian looked at her then, really looked at her, as if trying desperately to remember something else he feared losing. "You didn't embarrass me in there," he said. Evelyn gave the smallest smile. "Tired, kind, almost sad. Someone had to protect you, Mr. Whitmore." Neither of them noticed the partially opened office door farther down the hallway, or the man inside quietly watching everything through the narrow crack of light. People only noticed Evelyn Carter when something went wrong. That was exactly how she preferred it. The executive restaurant on the 39th floor of Whitmore Global came alive after 6 o'clock every evening, when Manhattan outside turned gold beneath thousands of office lights, and the city began pretending exhaustion was ambition. Men in $6,000 suits loosened silk ties beside private whiskey shelves. Women with diamond earrings discussed mergers over sea base flown in from Maine that same morning. Crystal glasses clinked softly beneath warm amber lighting while a pianist near the windows played old jazz standards slow enough to sound expensive. Evelyn moved through all of it like silence wrapped in black fabric. Calm, efficient, invisible when necessary. She carried trays without spilling a drop, memorized orders without writing them down, and somehow knew exactly when powerful people needed space or reassurance. Most executives barely looked at her twice. To them, she was simply part of the building, another polished surface inside Adrian Whitmore's empire. But the employees noticed things. They noticed how Evelyn always appeared near the private elevators moments before Adrian arrived. How she quietly replaced untouched black coffee with fresh tea whenever his hands trembled slightly during stressful weeks. How she adjusted schedules without being asked whenever his meetings suddenly disappeared from the calendar. Tiny things. Forgettable things. Unless someone paid attention long enough to connect them. Rachel paid attention. 3 nights after the boardroom incident, she stood near the hostess station pretending to review reservation charts while watching Evelyn reset table 14 beside the windows. "You knew he was struggling before anyone else did," Rachel said quietly. Evelyn did not look up. "Mr. Whitmore works too hard." Rachel folded her arms. "That is not what I asked." The pianist shifted into a softer melody as rain slid slowly down the glass behind them. Evelyn placed silverware beside a folded linen napkin with perfect alignment before answering. People notice more when they stay quiet. Rachel studied her carefully. 28 years old. No social media. No dating rumors. No complaints from coworkers. No history anyone could clearly explain before she appeared at Whitmore Global 11 months earlier. Even her employee file felt strangely empty. "You protect him," Rachel finally said. Evelyn's hands paused only briefly, then continued working. "I protect my job." But Rachel did not believe that either. Neither would Adrian if he ever started noticing the details hidden in plain sight. Upstairs, 42 floors above Manhattan traffic, Adrian Whitmore sat alone in his office staring at a yellow legal pad covered in handwriting he did not recognize. His own handwriting. "Meeting at 9. Zurich call at 11. Take medication after lunch. Do not forget Olivia's birthday donation." The last line hit hardest because he had forgotten. Again, Adrian leaned back slowly in the leather chair behind his desk while thunder rolled faintly outside. 3 months earlier, he forgot the code to his penthouse security system. 2 months earlier, he blanked during an interview with Bloomberg for nearly 7 seconds. Last week, he called a senior executive by the wrong name twice in the same conversation. Now he was writing notes to himself like an old man losing pieces of his mind 1 hour at a time. The office suddenly felt too quiet, too large. Adrian loosened his tie and closed his eyes. He remembered building Whitmore Global from a small investment office with 4 employees and borrowed furniture. He remembered sleeping on couches, Missing holidays. Fighting through years where nobody believed he would survive Wall Street. Back then, his mind moved faster than everyone around him. Sharp, relentless, precise. Now sometimes he opened a sentence and forgot how to finish it halfway through. A soft knock interrupted the silence. "Come in." Evelyn stepped inside carrying a tray with tea and a small white envelope. Adrian frowned slightly. "I did not order anything." "No," Evelyn replied gently. "But you skipped dinner again." She set the tray down near his desk before placing the envelope carefully beside his laptop. Adrian recognized the pharmacy logo immediately. His stomach tightened. "Your prescription refill arrived downstairs," Evelyn said quietly. "I signed for it so no one else would ask questions." Adrian stared at her. Most people became awkward around weakness. They rushed to fill silence with fake optimism or uncomfortable pity. Evelyn never did. She simply handled difficult things as if dignity mattered more than fear. "Thank you," he said softly. Evelyn nodded once and turned to leave. "Evelyn." She stopped near the door. Adrian hesitated. The city lights reflected faintly across the office windows behind him, making his expression look older somehow. "How bad was it?" he asked. "The boardroom." Evelyn remained still for a moment before answering honestly. "Bad enough that they noticed something." Adrian looked away immediately. That hurt more than he expected. Rain streaked across the glass behind him, while distant sirens echoed somewhere far below the tower. "I built this company because I was always the smartest person in the room," Adrian murmured quietly. "Now I walk into meetings terrified someone will realize I cannot remember what day it is." Evelyn's eyes softened slightly. "You still remember who built it?" Adrian gave a humorless smile. For now, silence settled between them. Heavy, human. Then Evelyn stepped closer to the desk and gently slid the tea toward him. "Drink this before it gets cold," she said softly. "And take your medication tonight. You forgot yesterday." Adrian looked up sharply. "How did you know that?" Evelyn immediately realized her mistake. Just 1 second too late. Her fingers tightened slightly against the tray in her hands. "The bottle was still full this morning," she answered carefully. Adrian stared at her longer this time. Really stared. Something about Evelyn never fit neatly inside the role she played. Waitresses notice things. But not like this. Not with this level of attention. Not with this kind of quiet devotion. Before he could ask another question, his office phone suddenly rang. Rachel's voice came through immediately. "Adrian, the Reynolds Group moved tomorrow's meeting up to 8 o'clock. Adrian reached for a pen automatically, then froze. He had already forgotten what she said halfway through the sentence. His face changed instantly. Panic. Fast and sharp. Evelyn saw it immediately. She crossed the office silently, picked up the legal pad beside him, and wrote the message down before Rachel even finished speaking. 8 o'clock. Reynolds Group. Conference Room B. Adrian looked at the note after hanging up. Then at Evelyn. She simply placed the pen back on the desk. Calm. Invisible again. As if saving powerful men from collapsing had become part of her nightly routine. The first person to suspect the truth was not a doctor. It was a man who wanted Adrian Whitmore's chair. Daniel Mercer stood near the glass wall outside Conference Room B with one hand in his pocket and the other wrapped around a cup of untouched espresso. At 51, Daniel had spent 2 decades climbing through Whitmore Global one ruthless inch at a time. He smiled often. Too often. The kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Employees respected him because they feared disappointing him. Investors trusted him because he always sounded calm during disasters. But Daniel Mercer had one private ambition he had never fully buried. One day, Whitmore Global would belong to him. And lately, Adrian Whitmore had begun making mistakes. Small ones at first. Forgotten names. Delayed signatures. Meetings moved twice because Adrian claimed he never approved the original schedule. Most executives dismissed it as stress. Daniel did not. Powerful men survived by noticing weakness before everyone else. Through the partially closed conference room doors, Daniel watched Adrian present quarterly expansion numbers to the Reynolds Group. Normally, Adrian dominated rooms effortlessly. He spoke like a man born with Wall Street inside his bloodstream. Every answer sharp, every pause intentional. But today something felt off again. Adrian stopped in the middle of a sentence and stared briefly at the projection screen as though the numbers had shifted into another language. Just 1 second, maybe 2. Then Evelyn Carter appeared quietly beside the refreshment station near the wall. She did not interrupt him, did not panic. She simply adjusted a document near Adrian's elbow while replacing his empty water glass. Daniel narrowed his eyes immediately. Adrian glanced downward. His gaze settled briefly on the document Evelyn had moved. Then he continued, speaking flawlessly. Smooth recovery. Too smooth. Daniel sipped his espresso slowly while watching Evelyn leave the room without drawing attention to herself. Interesting. Very interesting. Upstairs in the executive offices, Rachel sat at her desk reviewing schedules when Adrian suddenly emerged from the elevator looking exhausted enough to age 10 years in one afternoon. His tie hung slightly loose now. Dark circles shadowed beneath his eyes. Cancel my dinner tonight, Adrian said quietly while walking past her office. Rachel frowned. The governor is attending that fundraiser. Then send a donation. Adrian kept moving. I cannot do crowds tonight. Rachel hesitated before standing. Adrian. He stopped near the windows overlooking Lexington Avenue. Yellow headlights crawled below them through freezing rain. Have you spoken to your doctor again? Adrian said nothing for several seconds, then finally answered without turning around. They still do not know how quickly it is progressing. Rachel's throat tightened. Even now, hearing it spoken aloud felt unreal. Neurological memory disorder. Early onset. Progressive. The specialists used careful language wrapped in expensive medical terms, but all of them carried the same quiet terror beneath the surface. Adrian Whitmore was slowly losing pieces of himself. Nobody else knows? Rachel asked carefully. Adrian gave a tired smile that looked painfully fragile on a man once known for terrifying billion-dollar competitors across negotiating tables. Nobody can know. He looked down at the streets below. If the board suspects weakness, they will remove me before the disease does. Rachel wanted to say something reassuring, something hopeful, but hope felt dangerous lately. Instead, she quietly handed him a folder. Evelyn left this for you. Adrian frowned slightly. What is it? Your medication schedule. Rachel watched his expression carefully. Apparently you missed 2 doses this week. Adrian stared at the folder for a long moment before opening it. Inside were neatly organized reminders written in careful handwriting. Morning medication, evening dosage, appointment confirmations, meal times, even hydration notes during high-stress meetings. Tiny details, thoughtful details, the kind only someone paying close attention would notice. Adrian slowly sat down inside the chair near Rachel's desk. How long has she been doing this? Rachel answered honestly. Longer than you realize. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows while distant thunder rolled above Manhattan. Adrian flipped through the pages silently. Each note was simple, professional, no emotion written anywhere. Yet somehow the quiet care behind them felt almost unbearable. I never asked her to do this, he murmured. Rachel leaned gently against her desk. That might be why she keeps doing it. Downstairs, Evelyn stood alone inside the employee locker room, changing out of her uniform after a 14-hour shift. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. The tiny room smelled like coffee grounds, winter coats, and exhaustion. She opened her locker slowly and reached for the old pharmacy bag hidden beneath folded sweaters. 3 unpaid medical invoices slipped partly into view. Zurich Neurological Institute. The total printed across the top could have purchased a small apartment in Brooklyn. Evelyn quickly pushed the papers back beneath her clothes when the locker room door opened. Sarah from the evening staff walked in while pulling gloves onto frozen hands. You are still here? Sarah asked. Evelyn nodded lightly. Long day. Sarah hesitated before lowering her voice. People are talking upstairs. Evelyn remained still. About Mr. Whitmore? Sarah nodded carefully. Some executives think something is wrong with him. Evelyn closed her locker softly. People love rumors. This does not feel like a rumor. Sarah studied her. And honestly, you look worried every time he forgets something. Evelyn forced a small smile. Everyone worries about their boss. But later that night, after the restaurant closed and most of Manhattan disappeared into midnight rain, Evelyn sat alone at a tiny 24-hour diner 3 blocks from the tower, staring at her phone screen. A voicemail notification blinked silently. Zurich Neurological Institute. Final payment reminder. She closed her eyes briefly before listening. The doctor's voice remained calm and professional. Miss Carter, we cannot reserve Mr. Whitmore's treatment evaluation much longer without confirmation. Evelyn lowered the phone slowly. Outside the diner windows, icy rain streaked through red traffic lights while steam rose from subway grates into the freezing dark. She reached into her purse and removed a folded property document. Her mother's house in Connecticut. The only thing she had left that still felt like home. Evelyn stared at the paper for a very long time before whispering quietly to herself. He cannot lose everything before he even understands what is happening. Then she signed the sale agreement with trembling hands. Winter arrived in Manhattan the way heartbreak often does. Quietly at first, then all at once. By early December, Whitmore Global glittered with silver garlands, towering Christmas trees, and champagne parties for investors who smiled too much and trusted too little. The lobby smelled like pine and expensive perfume. Piano versions of holiday songs floated softly through marble hallways while assistants carried designer gift boxes between elevators. From the outside, the company looked untouchable. Inside, Adrian Whitmore was forgetting entire conversations. "You already approved this yesterday." Rachel's voice remained gentle, but the concern beneath it cut deeper every week. Adrian stared at the contract on his desk without recognizing the signature at the bottom. His signature. Again. Sunlight reflected sharply off the skyscrapers outside his office windows, forcing him to look away. Headaches had become constant now. Some mornings he woke up disoriented for several seconds, unable to remember which penthouse bedroom belonged to him. Other times he lost words halfway through sentences. Not complicated words. Simple ones. Elevator. Calendar. Tuesday. Tiny pieces of language disappearing like coins slipping through cracks in the floor. He rubbed tired fingers against his temple. "Do not tell anyone," Adrian whispered. Rachel nodded immediately. "I know." But fear had already begun spreading through the building in invisible ways. Executives noticed canceled meetings. Investors noticed shorter presentations. Daniel Mercer noticed everything. 2 days later, Whitmore Global hosted its annual winter gala on the 55th floor ballroom overlooking Central Park. Crystal chandeliers glowed above hundreds of wealthy guests dressed in black tuxedos and silk gowns, while snow drifted softly beyond the massive windows. Journalists moved carefully between billionaires. String music floated beneath low conversations about markets, politics, and acquisitions. Adrian stood near the center of it all, looking perfectly composed. Navy tuxedo, silver cufflinks, calm expression. The illusion of control remained flawless from a distance. But Evelyn saw the truth immediately. He had forgotten where he was supposed to stand during the opening photographs. Small mistake, barely noticeable, unless someone knew him well enough to recognize panic hidden beneath polished confidence. She crossed the ballroom quietly, carrying champagne trays beside other servers until she reached him near the stage. "Your guests from Boston are waiting near the west balcony, Mr. Whitmore," she said softly while handing him a glass he never intended to drink. Adrian looked toward her voice with visible relief before smoothly redirecting himself toward the correct group of investors. Nobody noticed the rescue. Nobody except Daniel Mercer. From across the ballroom, his narrowed eyes followed Evelyn carefully. Again, always her. He watched Adrian rely on her the way exhausted travelers rely on distant lighthouse beams during storms. Subtle, desperate, dangerous. Daniel approached Rachel near the orchestra platform an hour later. "Adrian seems distracted lately," he remarked casually. Rachel answered without emotion. "Everyone is tired during the fourth quarter." Daniel smiled lightly. "Tired people forget meetings. Adrian forgets entire discussions." Rachel's expression hardened slightly. "What exactly are you implying?" Daniel sipped champagne slowly before answering. "Nothing yet." Then he walked away. Those 2 words followed Rachel the rest of the night like shadows. Near midnight, snow began falling harder outside while guests slowly filtered toward elevators and chauffeured town cars. Evelyn stood alone near the coat check reviewing final invoices when she noticed Adrian staring silently at the giant Christmas tree in the lobby below. He looked lost again. Not confused exactly, just distant. She approached carefully. "Mr. Whitmore?" Adrian blinked slightly before turning toward her. "Do you ever feel afraid of becoming someone else?" he asked quietly. The question caught her off guard. Snow swirled outside the 40-foot windows behind him, while holiday lights reflected softly across polished marble floors. "People change," Evelyn answered gently. Adrian shook his head once. "No, I mean disappearing while your body stays behind." Her chest tightened painfully at the exhaustion in his voice. Adrian looked back toward the lobby tree, glowing gold beneath thousands of tiny lights. Some mornings I forget things that should matter, he admitted quietly. Last week I looked at my mother's birthday photograph and could not remember where it was taken. His jaw tightened slightly. I built an empire with my mind. What happens when that disappears too? Evelyn remained silent for a moment because sometimes silence respected pain better than comfort did. Then she stepped beside him and adjusted the slightly crooked cuff on his sleeve. Such a small gesture. Almost invisible. You are still here, she said softly. That matters more than you think. Adrian looked down at her hands briefly. You always know what to say. Evelyn gave the faintest smile. Sadder now than before. No, she whispered. I just know what people need to hear when they are scared. Neither of them noticed Daniel Mercer, standing motionless near the second-floor balcony above the lobby, watching everything through the railing shadows. Later that night, long after the gala ended, Evelyn returned to her small apartment in Queens carrying grocery bags through freezing wind. The building elevator was broken again. By the time she climbed 4 flights of stairs, her hands were red from cold. Inside the apartment, the heat barely worked. Old radiators hissed weakly beside frost-lined windows, while traffic noise echoed faintly from the street below. Evelyn set the groceries down beside stacks of medical paperwork covering the tiny kitchen table. Zurich Neurological Institute. Payment confirmed. Evaluation scheduled. Additional treatment costs pending. Her eyes lingered on the final number for several long seconds. Nearly everything she had left was gone now. Her savings. Her mother's house. The emergency fund she spent years building after losing her family. All of it disappearing quietly into someone else's future. She reached for an old framed photograph near the sink. Her mother smiling outside a small white Connecticut house during summer. Warm sunlight. Green trees. Simpler days. I am sorry, Evelyn whispered softly. Tears filled her eyes for the first time in months, but she blinked them away quickly. Then her phone vibrated suddenly across the table. Rachel's name appeared on the screen. Evelyn answered immediately. What happened? Rachel's voice sounded shaken. Daniel Mercer requested a private board review tonight. Evelyn froze. Snow rattled softly against the apartment windows. About Adrian? Silence. Then Rachel answered quietly. I think he knows something is wrong. The cruelest moments in life rarely arrive with sirens. Most of the time, they arrive quietly. Inside conference rooms. Behind closed doors. Hidden beneath polite smiles. 3 days before Christmas, Adrian Whitmore forgot how to unlock his own office. The security keypad beside the private elevator blinked softly while snow drifted across Manhattan outside. Adrian stood motionless in front of the door, staring at the numbers as though he had never seen them before. 42 floors below him, the city roared with morning traffic and holiday music. Up here, silence pressed against his chest like weight. He knew the code. Of course he knew it. He had used it every morning for 6 years. Yet his mind remained blank. Completely blank. A cold wave of panic crawled slowly through him. Then a gentle voice appeared behind him. 7, 2, 9, 4. Adrian closed his eyes briefly before entering the code. The door unlocked immediately. He exhaled shakily. Evelyn stood several feet away holding a cardboard tray of coffee cups for the executive staff. Her cheeks were pink from the winter cold outside, loose snowflakes melting slowly against the shoulders of her dark wool coat. She pretended not to notice the fear in his face, pretended not to notice his trembling hands. Adrian looked at her quietly. How long were you standing there? Long enough to know you skipped breakfast again, she answered softly. A tiny smile touched the corner of his mouth despite everything. You always avoid the question. And you always avoid eating. She handed him one of the coffee cups before walking toward the elevators. Adrian watched her leave with something dangerously close to dependence settling inside his chest. That terrified him more than the disease. Because people eventually left. They always did. Upstairs, the private board review began at 10 o'clock sharp. Daniel Mercer stood confidently before a screen displaying quarterly leadership evaluations, while 12 board members listened carefully around the long oak table. Rachel sat near the far and trying not to look nervous. Adrian arrived 2 minutes late. Another thing Daniel noticed immediately. Good morning, Adrian, Daniel said smoothly. We were just discussing long-term operational stability. Adrian nodded once while taking his seat. Continue. Daniel smiled politely. Several investors have expressed concerns about executive continuity. Continuity. Such an elegant word for replacement. Adrian remained calm outwardly, but Rachel saw his jaw tighten slightly. Daniel clicked another slide onto the screen. Stress-related performance decline among chief executives is increasingly common in high-pressure industries. Adrian looked directly at him now. Are you questioning my leadership? Daniel raised both hands lightly. Not at all. I am protecting the company. Silence settled heavily across the room. Snow tapped softly against the tall windows overlooking Park Avenue, while distant sirens echoed below. Then Daniel turned toward the board carefully. I simply believe Whitmore Global deserves transparency regarding any potential health concerns affecting executive judgment. Rachel's stomach dropped instantly. Adrian's expression did not change, but the color slowly disappeared from his face. One board member cleared his throat awkwardly. Another avoided eye contact completely. Nobody defended him. That hurt more than the accusation itself. Daniel stepped forward calmly. Perhaps a temporary medical evaluation would reassure everyone. Temporary. Another polite word hiding a knife beneath it. Adrian opened his mouth to respond, then suddenly stopped. His eyes drifted briefly toward the screen behind Daniel. Confusion flickered across his face. Fast, sharp, terrifying. He forgot where he was for half a second. Half a second was enough. Daniel saw it. So did everyone else. Rachel's pulse hammered painfully. Adrian blinked hard and recovered immediately. But the damage was already done. Fear had entered the room, and fear spreads faster than truth. 40 minutes later, Adrian stood alone inside his office, staring at Manhattan through rain-streaked windows, while his untouched coffee turned cold behind him. His reflection looked older now, more fragile. The disease was accelerating. He could feel it. Meetings exhausted him. Numbers blurred unexpectedly. Names slipped away in the middle of conversations. Sometimes at night, he woke up unable to remember whether his mother was still alive for several horrible seconds before reality returned. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Evelyn stepped carefully inside, carrying fresh tea. Adrian laughed quietly, without humor. You appear every time my life falls apart. Evelyn placed the tea down gently. That seems to happen often lately. Adrian rubbed tired hands across his face. They know something is wrong. Evelyn did not deny it. Daniel Mercer suspects more than the others. Adrian stared out toward the gray skyline. He wants my company. No. Evelyn corrected softly. He wants your weakness. Adrian turned toward her slowly. The city lights reflected faintly across her eyes while snow drifted outside the windows behind her. And what do you want? The question surprised even him. Evelyn looked down briefly before answering. I want you to survive this. Adrian's chest tightened unexpectedly. Nobody spoke to him like that anymore. Not investors. Not executives. Not friends who slowly disappeared once weakness entered the room. Only her. Always her. Then Rachel rushed suddenly into the office without knocking. Fear drained all color from her face. Adrian, she said breathlessly. Daniel requested access to your private medical records. Silence. Heavy. Immediate. Adrian looked physically ill now. Evelyn stepped slightly closer without thinking. Protective instinct moving before logic could stop it. Rachel lowered her voice. The board has not approved it yet. But if he finds proof, she could not finish the sentence. Adrian sank slowly into the chair behind his desk. Snow continued falling outside the tower in slow white silence while thousands of strangers moved through Manhattan, completely unaware that one of the most powerful men in America was quietly falling apart behind glass walls. Evelyn watched him carefully. Exhausted, cornered, terrified. Then she made a decision that would change everything. He will not find anything, she said softly. Adrian looked up immediately. What are you talking about? Evelyn reached into her purse and removed a small silver flash drive. Rachel frowned in confusion. What is that? Evelyn's voice remained calm even while her fingers trembled slightly around the drive. Every medical communication, every Zurich consultation, every prescription authorization linked to Whitmore Global servers. Adrian stood instantly. Evelyn, no. But she already understood what had to happen. If Daniel found those files, Adrian would lose the company before treatment even began. His entire life would collapse publicly before he had any chance to fight back. Evelyn looked directly at Adrian with heartbreaking calm. Sometimes protecting someone means letting them hate you for a while. Then before either of them could stop her, she walked toward the executive server room down the hall, carrying the only evidence capable of destroying Adrian Whitmore forever. Snow fell heavily over Manhattan the night Evelyn Carter destroyed her own future. The executive server room sat behind 2 layers of biometric security on the 43rd floor of Whitmore Global. No windows, no warmth, just rows of silent machines glowing blue beneath fluorescent lights while millions of confidential files lived and breathed through cables hidden beneath steel floors. Evelyn stood alone inside the cold room, holding the silver flash drive tightly in one trembling hand. Her reflection stared back faintly from the dark monitor screens surrounding her. Tired eyes, pale face, a woman quietly preparing to become the villain in someone else's story. She inserted the drive slowly. One final warning appeared on the screen. Permanent deletion cannot be reversed. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Adrian's exhausted voice echoed inside her memory. What happens when I disappear too? Her fingers pressed the key anyway. Files vanished one by one. Zurich consultations, neurological evaluations, prescription authorizations, treatment recommendations. Every trace connecting Adrian Whitmore's illness to Whitmore Global servers disappeared into silence. By the time the deletion finished, tears had gathered quietly in Evelyn's eyes. Not because she regretted it, because she already understood the price. 20 minutes later, alarms echoed across the executive floors. Sharp, immediate. Red security lights flashed through hallways while emergency protocols activated automatically. Employees stepped out of offices in confusion. Rachel rushed from the elevator just as security officers entered the server room and found Evelyn standing alone beside the terminal. She did not run, did not argue. She simply looked exhausted. Daniel Mercer arrived moments later wearing the expression of a man finally catching the proof he wanted. "What exactly is happening here?" he demanded sharply. One of the security technicians answered immediately. Sensitive executive files were deleted from the private network. Daniel's eyes moved slowly toward Evelyn. By her. Silence. Heavy and terrible. Rachel stepped forward instantly. Wait. There has to be another explanation. But Evelyn spoke before anyone else could. I accessed the files. Rachel stared at her in shock. Evelyn. Daniel's smile remained small and controlled. Dangerous precisely because it looked polite. Why would a waitress have access to confidential executive systems? Evelyn looked directly at him. Calm. Still calm somehow. Because Mr. Whitmore trusted me. The hallway went completely silent. Adrian emerged from the elevator at that exact moment. His face drained of color the second he saw security surrounding Evelyn. What happened? Daniel turned smoothly toward him. Apparently your employee has been tampering with confidential company information. Adrian looked at Evelyn immediately. Fear, confusion, betrayal, all crashing together inside his exhausted expression. Evelyn. She could not look at him for long. I deleted the files. Rachel whispered softly. Why would you do this? Evelyn swallowed once before answering. Because they were dangerous. Daniel stepped closer immediately. Dangerous to whom? Evelyn said nothing. Adrian stared at her like he no longer recognized the woman standing in front of him. The woman who remembered his medication schedules better than he did. The woman who quietly carried pieces of his collapsing life for months without asking for anything in return. What files? Adrian finally asked quietly. Daniel answered before Evelyn could. Medical records. Adrian froze. Completely. Daniel continued carefully, almost gently. It appears Miss Carter illegally accessed private health documentation connected to executive operations. Rachel looked horrified now. Daniel, stop. But Daniel was already watching Adrian closely. Watching realization spread slowly across his face. Watching fear turn into something colder. You knew? Adrian whispered toward Evelyn. She remained silent too long. And silence can sound very close to guilt. Daniel folded his arms. Perhaps she intended to use the information for leverage. No, Rachel answered instantly. She would never. Then why destroy evidence? Daniel interrupted smoothly. Nobody had an answer. Adrian looked down at the floor briefly as though trying to steady himself against something invisible. Then finally asked the question that hurt most. How much did you know? Evelyn's voice almost broke for the first time. Enough to protect you. Daniel laughed quietly beneath his breath. That is convenient. Adrian lifted his eyes toward her again. Hurt lived there now. Deep and personal. You went through my medical records? Evelyn's fingers tightened at her sides. I was trying to help. By violating my privacy? His voice rose slightly. Not angry yet. Worse. Wounded. I did not know what else to do, she whispered. Daniel stepped closer immediately. Adrian, this is a serious breach of trust. The board will demand accountability. Accountability. Another elegant word hiding cruelty beneath polished language. Adrian looked exhausted suddenly. More exhausted than Evelyn had ever seen him. Everyone out, he said quietly. Daniel hesitated. Adrian out. The room emptied slowly until only Adrian and Evelyn remained beneath the cold fluorescent lights. Snow drifted beyond distant hallway windows while security alarms finally faded back into silence. Adrian stood motionless beside the server terminal. Tell me the truth. Evelyn looked at him carefully. She wanted to explain everything. The treatments. The payments. The house she sold. The fear that followed him every day like a shadow. But if she spoke now, Daniel would investigate deeper. The Zurich records would surface elsewhere. Adrian would lose everything before treatment even began. So instead, she chose the only thing left. She let him misunderstand her. I crossed a line, she said softly. Adrian stared at her for several painful seconds. I trusted you. The words landed harder than shouting ever could. Evelyn lowered her eyes because she could not survive seeing disappointment inside his face much longer. Adrian walked slowly toward the door before stopping beside her one final time. Rachel will arrange severance compensation, he said quietly. Formal now. Distant. Security will deactivate your access tonight. Evelyn nodded once. Calm on the outside. Breaking quietly underneath. Adrian hesitated as though part of him still wanted an explanation that made sense. Something that would restore the strange, fragile trust built between them over months of silent understanding. But exhaustion won instead. He walked away without looking back. Evelyn remained alone inside the freezing server room, listening to his footsteps disappear down the hallway. Only then did tears finally slip silently down her face. Outside the tower, Christmas lights reflected across wet Manhattan streets while strangers hurried through snow carrying shopping bags and coffee cups beneath glowing windows. Nobody noticed the young woman leaving Whitmore Global through the side employee exit carrying one small cardboard box against her chest. Nobody noticed she paused briefly across the street to look up at the 42nd floor office where Adrian Whitmore still stood near the windows alone. Protecting someone quietly often means accepting that they may never understand why you disappeared. After Evelyn Carter disappeared from Whitmore Global, the building became strangely louder. Phones rang harder. Meetings stretched longer. Executives spoke too quickly inside conference rooms filled with artificial confidence. Yet beneath all the noise, something important was missing. Adrian felt it immediately. The tea arrived cold now. His schedule carried mistakes. Nobody reminded him when migraines started behind his eyes before investor calls. Nobody quietly moved important documents closer when his hands hesitated searching for words. The building still functioned, but the quiet rhythm holding him together had vanished. 3 weeks passed. Christmas came and went beneath heavy snow and expensive decorations no one truly noticed anymore. Adrian spent most nights alone inside his office staring at screens he struggled more and more to understand. Daniel Mercer had become careful since the server incident. Too careful. He smiled politely during meetings while slowly positioning himself closer to board influence every day. Rachel noticed it. Adrian noticed it. But exhaustion dulled his ability to fight back the way he once could. One freezing January morning, Adrian forgot where he parked his own car inside the underground garage. He stood alone beneath harsh fluorescent lights while snowmelt dripped slowly from concrete ceilings around him. Rows of black luxury sedans stretched endlessly before his eyes. For one horrible minute, he could not remember which vehicle belonged to him. Panic arrived fast now, faster than before. His breathing tightened painfully. Then his phone buzzed softly inside his coat pocket. Medication reminder. 8 a.m. Breakfast first. The message froze him completely. He stared at the screen in silence. No name attached. Just the reminder. Simple. Calm. Familiar. Adrian looked around the empty garage slowly as realization settled inside him. Evelyn. Even after everything, she was still trying to protect him. Later that afternoon, Rachel entered Adrian's office carrying a small cardboard box security had finally cleared from storage. These were found in Evelyn's employee locker, she said quietly. Adrian looked up slowly from paperwork scattered across his desk. He had not spoken her name aloud in nearly a month. Somehow that made hearing it hurt more. Rachel placed the box down carefully. I thought you should see this before Human Resources disposes of it. Adrian hesitated before opening it. Inside sat ordinary things. A worn paperback novel. Cheap gloves with frayed fingertips. An old silver thermos. Receipts folded carefully together with handwritten notes clipped beside them. At first, none of it made sense. Then Adrian noticed the dates. Prescription refill confirmations. Neurology consultations. Zurich flight estimates. His chest tightened instantly. Rachel, his voice barely worked now. Rachel slowly handed him another envelope. There is more. Inside rested a property sale agreement from Connecticut finalized 2 weeks earlier. Seller, Evelyn Carter. Adrian frowned slightly before turning the page. Sale amount transferred directly to Zurich Neurological Institute. His vision blurred. Rachel lowered her eyes quietly. I checked the account numbers. Adrian stared at the papers without moving. Snow drifted silently outside the office windows while Manhattan traffic crawled through gray January slush far below them. No, he whispered. Rachel nodded once, tears gathering softly in her eyes now too. She paid for your treatment evaluation. Adrian sat down slowly because suddenly his legs no longer trusted the floor beneath him. More documents slipped from the box onto the desk. Medication schedules written entirely in Evelyn's handwriting. Emergency symptom notes. Lists titled things that help during memory episodes. Every page carried quiet evidence of months spent protecting him while asking for absolutely nothing in return. Then Adrian found the notebook. Small, black, worn soft around the edges. He opened it carefully. Inside were hundreds of handwritten reminders. Not for herself. For him. January 4th. He forgot Olivia's birthday again. Remind him gently. December 19th. Bright lights worsen headaches before evening meetings. November 22nd. Panic attack after boardroom confusion. Chamomile tea helped. Adrian's breathing became uneven. Rachel covered her mouth quietly beside him. Then near the final pages, Adrian found one sentence written smaller than the others. If one day he forgets me, at least let him remember who he is. Silence swallowed the office completely. Adrian lowered the notebook slowly while tears filled his eyes for the first time in years. Real tears. Quiet ones. The kind powerful men hide because they do not know how to survive being seen broken. She sold her home, he whispered. Rachel nodded carefully. And after the deletion incident, she disappeared before severance was even processed. Adrian closed his eyes painfully. Every moment replayed differently now. The tea. The reminders. The calm voice guiding him through panic. The way she stood between him and humiliation over and over without ever asking for recognition. And he had fired her. Worse, he had believed the worst about her because fear made weak men suspicious of kindness. Adrian suddenly stood so quickly the chair rolled backward across the office floor. Find her. Rachel blinked in surprise. Adrian, find Evelyn. His voice cracked slightly beneath the weight of regret. Please. Rachel hesitated. We already tried after she left. Her apartment lease ended last week. Adrian looked devastated now. Then keep looking. Snow pressed softly against the skyscraper windows while the city darkened toward evening beyond them. Adrian gripped Evelyn's notebook tightly against his chest like something sacred. I thought she betrayed me, he whispered quietly. Rachel answered with heartbreaking honesty. No, she protected you so completely that she let you hate her for it. Adrian lowered his head slowly because some truths arrived too late to undo the damage they leave behind. That night, long after the building emptied, Adrian remained alone in his office reading every handwritten page Evelyn left behind. Outside, Manhattan glittered cold and distant beneath winter fog. Inside the silence, Adrian Whitmore finally understood something terrifying. The woman he trusted least in the end had sacrificed more for him than anyone else in his entire life. By February, Adrian Whitmore had become a man searching for ghosts. Rachel found him one evening, standing alone inside the executive restaurant on the 39th floor long after closing time. Chairs sat upside down on polished tables, while city lights shimmered through dark windows beyond the empty dining room. Adrian stood near table 14, staring silently at the seat where Evelyn used to place his tea during difficult nights. You should go home, Rachel said gently from the doorway. Adrian gave a faint smile without looking at her. I forgot where home feels like lately. His voice sounded tired in ways sleep could never fix. Rachel stepped closer slowly. We found something. Adrian turned immediately. Hope appeared too quickly in his eyes. Dangerous hope. One of the maintenance staff recognized her from a train station cafe in Boston. Rachel explained carefully. South Station. Adrian grabbed his coat before she even finished the sentence. Snow covered most of the Northeast by the time Adrian's private car reached Boston 3 hours later. The city looked softer than Manhattan somehow. Older. Quieter. Historic brick buildings lined frozen streets beneath pale winter skies, while steam rose gently from subway grates into the cold evening air. Adrian sat silently during the drive, Evelyn's small black notebook resting against his lap the entire time. He had read every page so many times he nearly memorized her handwriting. February 7th. He smiled today after the investor meeting. Good. January 14th. He pretends not to be afraid when symptoms worsen. December 24th. He spent Christmas Eve alone in the office again. Every sentence revealed pieces of loneliness Adrian never realized someone had noticed. Worse, someone had cared about. South Station buzzed with tired travelers pulling rolling suitcases through crowds, while snowfall drifted softly beyond giant glass windows overhead. Near the west entrance sat a tiny cafe squeezed between a bookstore and a florist stand. Warm yellow lights glowed through fogged windows, while jazz music floated faintly into the cold corridor outside. Adrian stopped walking the second he saw her. Evelyn stood behind the cafe counter, wearing a simple gray sweater beneath a black apron. Her hair was tied back loosely now. No makeup. No polished executive restaurant uniform. Just exhaustion hidden beneath quiet grace. She looked thinner than before. Paler too. Yet somehow she still moved with the same calm rhythm that once held his collapsing world together. She handed coffee to an elderly customer with a gentle smile before turning toward the espresso machine again. Then she saw him. Everything inside her face froze. Adrian suddenly forgot every prepared sentence during the train ride. Every apology. Every explanation. Because standing there in warm cafe light, Evelyn looked heartbreakingly human compared to the perfect silent strength he built around her in memory. Mr. Whitmore, she whispered softly. Adrian almost smiled, hearing the formal distance in her voice again. Almost. You still call me that. Evelyn looked down briefly. Habit. Snow tapped quietly against the station windows while commuters hurried past outside, carrying winter coats and paper cups through fading evening light. Neither of them moved for several seconds. Then Adrian finally stepped closer to the counter. Rachel told me where you were. Evelyn nodded once. I figured she might eventually. Adrian looked around the tiny cafe slowly. Worn wooden tables. Cheap ceramic mugs. A handwritten menu hanging crooked near the register. Nothing here resembled the polished luxury world she once moved through effortlessly at Whitmore Global. You left everything, he said quietly. Evelyn gave a small tired smile. Not everything. Adrian's chest tightened painfully. He placed the black notebook gently onto the counter between them. The moment Evelyn saw it, emotion flickered across her face for the first time. Real emotion. Vulnerable. Exposed. You found it, she whispered. Adrian nodded slowly. I found all of it. Silence settled between them while soft jazz drifted overhead from old speakers near the kitchen. Finally, Adrian looked directly into her eyes. You sold your home. Evelyn remained still. You paid for Zurich. She said nothing. You protected me while I accused you of betrayal. Her fingers tightened slightly around the dish towel in her hands. Adrian's voice lowered now, rough with regret. Why? Evelyn looked toward the station windows where snow continued falling beyond rushing strangers. Because you were scared, she answered softly. And nobody should face that alone. Adrian shook his head slowly like the answer hurt too much to carry. I fired you. Evelyn finally looked back at him. There was no anger in her eyes. That somehow hurt worst of all. You were trying to survive. Adrian laughed quietly beneath his breath. Broken sound. No. I was trying not to fall apart. A long silence followed. Then Adrian spoke the truth he carried all the way from Manhattan. I trusted fear more than I trusted you. Evelyn's eyes softened painfully. Fear does that to people. Adrian stepped closer to the counter now, close enough to notice the exhaustion beneath her eyes. the redness around her hands from constant winter cold and dishwater. You sacrificed everything, he whispered, for a man who could not even remember your name some mornings. Evelyn looked down briefly before answering with heartbreaking calm. I remembered enough for both of us. Adrian closed his eyes because suddenly breathing felt difficult again. Outside the station, snowstorms buried Boston beneath white silence while train announcements echoed faintly through loudspeakers overhead. Inside the little cafe, the most powerful man in Manhattan stood speechless before the woman who quietly gave away pieces of her life just to protect what remained of his. Evelyn reached gently for the notebook still resting between them. You should start treatment soon, she said softly. The earlier stages respond better. Adrian looked at her carefully. Come back with me. She froze slightly. Adrian continued before fear could stop him. Not as an employee. Not because I need someone to save me from forgetting things. His voice cracked quietly now, honest for the first time in years. Come back, because when everything in my life started disappearing, you were the only thing that still felt real. Tears gathered silently in Evelyn's eyes. She looked away quickly before he could fully see them. Some people enter your life loudly. Others save it so quietly you do not understand their value until the silence they leave behind becomes unbearable. Spring arrived slowly that year, as if the city itself needed time to heal. By late April, snow had disappeared from Boston sidewalks, replaced by cold rain and pale sunlight reflecting across wet brick streets. Adrian Whitmore still forgot things sometimes. Names occasionally slipped away during stressful mornings. Certain memories blurred unexpectedly around the edges. But treatment had slowed the progression enough for hope to return quietly into rooms that once felt hopeless. Zurich specialists called it promising. Adrian simply called it another chance he did not deserve. He spent most weekends traveling between Manhattan and Boston now. Not because business demanded it, because someone there mattered more than business finally did. The little cafe inside South Station remained busy every morning with tired commuters rushing toward trains, while jazz music drifted softly above steaming coffee cups and newspaper pages. Evelyn still worked behind the counter 3 days a week despite Adrian offering her anything she wanted. A new apartment, financial security, freedom from work forever. She refused every single offer with the same gentle smile. I do not need saving, she told him once while wiping down tables near closing time. Adrian never forgot that sentence. Because she was right. Evelyn had never been weak. She had simply been quiet in a world addicted to noise. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Adrian arrived unexpectedly carrying a folder beneath his arm while thunder rolled softly above Boston Harbor. Evelyn looked up from the espresso machine and smiled faintly the second she saw him standing near the doorway. You missed your train meeting, she said calmly. Adrian loosened his tie slightly. I chose to. She laughed softly beneath her breath. The sound still surprised him every time. For months, he thought strength looked like control. Now he understood it often sounded much gentler. Adrian sat near the window while rain slid slowly down the glass beside him. Evelyn placed tea in front of him automatically before he could order. Chamomile. 2 honey packets. No lemon. Some habits survive even after heartbreak. Adrian looked at the cup quietly before speaking. I remembered your birthday this morning. Evelyn blinked once in surprise. You never knew my birthday. Adrian smiled faintly and tapped the small black notebook resting beside him. March 12th. You wrote it in the back beside medication schedules. Evelyn shook her head softly. You were not supposed to read all of that. I think I was. Silence settled comfortably between them while commuters moved through the station outside, carrying umbrellas and coffee cups beneath gray skies. Adrian looked healthier now. Still tired sometimes. Still human. But no longer hollow. Daniel Mercer resigned yesterday, Adrian finally said. Evelyn frowned slightly. What happened? Adrian looked out the rain-streaked windows. The board discovered he attempted to manipulate executive concerns for personal advancement. Evelyn lowered her eyes quietly. I never wanted anyone hurt. Adrian's expression softened immediately. That is exactly why you are different from people like him. The cafe lights glowed warmly around them while evening crowds slowly thickened near the station platforms outside. Then Adrian slid the folder across the table toward her. Evelyn looked confused. What is this? Open it. Inside rested architectural drawings, nonprofit registration forms, and medical partnership agreements. At the top of the first page, Printed in elegant navy lettering were the words Evelyn Carter Memory Center. Evelyn stared at the page silently. Adrian spoke carefully now. Honest. Vulnerable. Whitmore Global is funding a neurological research foundation in Boston. Evelyn looked up immediately. Adrian. No, he shook his head softly. Let me finish this correctly for once. Rain tapped gently against the station windows while distant train announcements echoed overhead. Adrian's voice lowered slightly. For years I thought power meant never needing anyone. Then I met a woman who quietly carried my fear, my illness, and my dignity when I could not carry them myself. Evelyn's eyes filled slowly with tears. Adrian continued before emotion stopped him. The foundation is named after you because people deserve to know what real strength looks like. Evelyn looked down at the documents again. Her hands trembled slightly against the paper. I did not do any of this for recognition. Adrian smiled sadly. I know. That was precisely why she deserved it. Several weeks later, the Evelyn Carter Memory Center officially opened beside Boston Harbor beneath pale spring sunlight and hundreds of white flowers lining the entrance walkway. Doctors, journalists, investors, politicians, they all attended. Cameras flashed while reporters discussed breakthrough neurological partnerships and innovative early-stage treatment research. Adrian stood behind the podium wearing a navy suit with silver threaded lightly through his dark hair now. He looked older than before. Softer too. Not weaker. Just human in ways success had hidden for years. Evelyn remained near the back of the crowd beside Rachel, uncomfortable with attention as always. Adrian glanced toward her before beginning his speech. Most people believe lives are changed by loud moments. He said quietly into the microphone. Big victories. Public achievements. Headlines. The harbor wind moved gently through the crowd while sunlight shimmered across the water behind him. But sometimes the people who save us do it quietly. They protect pieces of us we are too afraid to admit are breaking. Evelyn lowered her eyes immediately. Adrian smiled softly toward her anyway. And sometimes, he continued, the strongest person in the room is the one nobody notices until they are gone. Silence spread gently through the audience. Real silence. The kind built from truth instead of performance. Adrian stepped away from the podium afterward and walked directly toward Evelyn through the applauding crowd. She looked overwhelmed already. You hate public attention, he said quietly once he reached her. Evelyn gave him a watery smile. A little. Adrian offered his arm gently. Stay anyway. She looked at him for a long moment before taking it softly. Around them, cameras flashed and powerful people continued speaking loudly about success, investments, and the future. But Adrian Whitmore no longer cared much about loud things anymore. Because the woman beside him had taught him something far more valuable. The people who love you most rarely announce it. They simply remember your pain before you say a word, and protect your dignity long enough for you to find yourself again.